want to skip ahead a little bit to your election in 2010 to Skipton and Ripon. I would say, Julian, and again, I don't mean this in any sort of pejorative sense, you're quite a quiet and maybe reserved character. I think that would be fair. But we'll have to wait until after a pub crawl to verify that for sure. Parliament, on the other hand, is dominated by characters that are quite loud, sometimes brash, larger than life. I think you know the main figures that people have in their head, maybe when they think of Parliament. What made you think to yourself, do you know what, going into the House of Commons and that route and that way of making an influence was the right one for you, as opposed to the many other ways that people can make a difference in political life?
Well, I think I'd been lucky enough to develop and run a successful business in Asia and in London, and I'd always kind of wanted to contribute and enter public service. But had wanted to establish, a career elsewhere first. But you're right. I mean, I think Parliament is, does attract people from a range of backgrounds. And one of the skills and one of the attributes of a good MP is to be pretty vocal and to be pretty, forward on the floor of the House. But I think also, there's a need for a mix of personalities. And as you may know, I worked up the route after 6 years, in the Whip's office, and that was actually an interesting way of being at the very heart of things, but maybe not having to make a speech on every topic that came up.
Yeah. When you were elected, then you didn't hang around long. Best part of 5 years as Parliamentary Private Secretary in the Department of International Development, I think is correct. I wonder, you spent 5 years in that department, learning how it worked. This year, the Department of International Development was subsumed into the Commonwealth, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and then the UK overseas aid budget has been reduced from 0.7 to 0.5. And both of those have been criticised, as I'm sure you know, by many of the aid charities that you will have worked with at the time, as well as your then leader, David Cameron. Did you agree with those decisions? Do you think that those decisions will have a detrimental effect on the things that you were working towards over the course of 5 years in the Department of International Development?
Well, you're right. The department has done incredible work under governments of different, different colour. The one piece of work which really stood out was the help that we gave during the height of the Syrian crisis, where we were the second largest donor by far, and I think having that dedicated focus did certainly give, and having a specific department under Labour and the Conservative Party did make a big difference. So the decision to split out probably wasn't a decision I particularly would have wanted to see, but you can see having it within the Foreign Office does also have benefits, and obviously reducing the sum of money again isn't something that I would have liked to see. But I, on the other hand, recognise that we still are, the second, third biggest donor internationally, even at 0.5%. And what the Chancellor said is this is not a permanent situation. This is a temporary situation. Now, you can then have a debate, obviously, around, is this right that we're doing this? But I think we are in extreme circumstances now. And whilst, it's a shame we're doing it, it's not something that I think is completely illogical. I can see why the government has taken this decision.
I wonder, again, I mean, you spend a good amount of time in that department. One of the criticisms that's sometimes levelled is that money isn't well spent. And you hear that quite often, people citing money going to India, for example, when, that country has their own space program, China, funding kind of pop stars. And you're in that department, did you ever think to yourself, actually, that's not a really good way to spend public money, or did you have the opposite reaction?
Well, I think that, so I was involved in supporting the legislation and making sure we got support for 0.7. I do think there are dangers of a target like that, and one of the unintended consequences was that you end up having to sort of spend the money, and that becomes the priority, maybe over prioritising exactly what project to go in for. That said, the department under Justine Greening, under Andrew Mitchell, under other Secretaries of State did put a lot of effort in trying to make sure it was well spent. So I think it was well spent, but I do think in the government's favour on this decision to reduce to 0.5, the support from many people in the United Kingdom for not adapting to the fact we have gone through in the last 9-10 months an extreme situation in the UK, but retaining this target. I think the government may have got the balance right with that, as long as as we pick up in a year or so, we can go back to 0.7. But there certainly are dangers, I think, of the target. But on balance, it was good that Britain, I think, put that sort of level of commitment.